Welcome in, cool kids. I'm glad that you've chosen to join us this week. I've got a fantastic guest for you. This week, we are going to be talking to Lee Ostler. Now, Lee is teamed up with Roland Thompson, and both of these gentlemen are working at a foundation that they've built and are building called Heart of the Fathers. Their mission is really to make sure that grandparents and grandfathers in particular know and understand how to connect with grandkids. They've got some great ideas, they've got some great supports, including their new book, Grand Connect. Now, Lee and I are going to be talking about that, the mission of Heart of the Fathers, as well as their recent event out in Washington, where they had a lot of people come together to talk about how they can be a supportive structure and understanding heart to all their grandchildren as well as family members and community. Before we get started with this conversation, though, I want to let you know that this quarter I'm being featured in Grand Magazine. Now, the reason I'm being featured in Grand Magazine is because I am talking about how Generation X grandfathers in particular and grandparents in general really have an awesome opportunity to move the ball forward in terms of connecting with grandchildren, being very active family members, and not just sitting back and letting grandmas take all the fun. So be sure to check out this quarter's edition of Grand Magazine. And you can do that by going to readgrand.com. And I'm going to have a link to this into the show notes as well. So it's a fantastic publication that's dedicated to helping grandparents. And we've got several members and friends of the show that contribute to there. So not only has Roland written an article for that, Neil Taft has written an article. Richard and Linda Iyer continually write articles and submissions for Grand Magazine, as well as Dr. Carrie Byrne with her suggestions on how to connect with grandchildren from a distance. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Lee. Hi, Lee. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast.
Well, hey, Greg, it's certainly a pleasure to be on with you again. This is a cool podcast.
Well, I appreciate you coming back on. I know that you and also former guest Roland Thompson have been busy putting together Hearts of the Father. You've had some events. You guys are doing some good work out there on the West Coast, and I wanted to catch up and learn a little bit more about it. So this is going to be a fun opportunity for us to see what the other cool grandpas on the other coast are doing.
Yeah, that's true. We're on the west coast, whatever you want to call it, but it's been we've had a lot of things going on, a lot of irons in the fire here.
Sure. And what I'd like to do is start out a little bit and have you talk to us about Heart of the Fathers. I know it's something that Roland's been talking about for a little bit. You've got the website up and going. You've had an event recently. Tell us a little bit about how you guys have come together and about the direction that you're wanting to take this program.
Well, that's some good starting points here. So, Heart of the Fathers is a foundation. Roland actually started this several years ago, and it kind of sat idle in his mind as I don't know, timing. You know, God's timing is important for everything, and so the timing just probably wasn't right. But anyway, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been collaborating as a group of grandfathers, grandparents about this concept of what is the heart of the father, and what is its responsibility or opportunity with the hearts of the children, connecting them. You know, there's an old biblical verse to that effect, and so we're just kind of thinking it through of what can fathers do, what can grandparents do, what can grandmothers do to be able to influence and leave our children and our grandchildren in a more favorable, position, situation with our influence before we're done and gone. You know, it's like at some point we're not going to be here anymore, and we may or may not be real good at leaving, things behind. or influence behind. So the question is, how do we do that? And that's a really wide open question. There's a lot of people, even you're in this space. There's a lot of people who are interested in this about how to have optimum influence and to leave behind not just legacy, but influence with our grandchildren so that they're more empowered. And so Heart of the Fathers has kind of oriented in that way. And more recently, just last month, we had a fairly significant event in our location in the state of Washington where we rented the convention center for an evening. We brought in some speakers to speak on men's health, family health, addiction, and so forth. We titled the event "Winning the Battle for Heart and Connection." And going forward, that's going to be one of the layers that will be layered into this whole equation is how do we win the battle for heart and connection? Because part of the idea of being a grandparent is you got to fight the battle. You're battling for heart and connection in the lives of your adult children as well as your grandchildren. And so, as we mentioned previously, he and I co-authored the book Grand Connect, which is hopefully it will remain as kind of one of the signature pieces of at least our part of this movement is how do you connect? How do you make connection with grandchildren? How do you accept them where they're at? What's the importance of that? What's the role of some of our cultural nuances or cultural factors that's in our culture, especially related to shame, where we want to control the outcome. And so we just culturally resort to shame. It's a performance mindset. Our culture is oriented around that. And so where this kind of winds up going is in the direction of emotional regulation. And so that's kind of the foundation stone is, the concept of what it means to be a regulated person. And from a grandparent or an older person's perspective, we kind of sit here thinking that we've got life figured out. It is what it is. We're doing okay. And if only our children and our grandchildren could also figure out life as well as we figured it out, then everybody'd be happy. It turns out that we can't really go that direction with our families because the idea is if you want them to change, you have to change. And there's a personal transformation. It's like I was thinking about earlier today. How do your children know how to do these things? How do your grandchildren know how to do these things if you're not modeling it? If you're not modeling what transformation looks like, if you're not modeling what vulnerability looks like, if you're not modeling what it looks like to be a regulated person, to accept others as they are, as they present, rather than as you want them to be, which we have all kinds of snide, manipulative, gaslighting comments that try to, teach principles or concepts, but not in a very good way. That's just our culture. And so we think we hold the position that even as adults, older adults, the elderly, grandparents, that there's still room for us to change, transition, as it were, to transform, and to model what it looks like to be an emotionally regulated person. The author Richard Eyre, who's kind of big in the grandparenting space, was asked the question, what's the most important thing for a grandparent to do to become a better grandparent? And his comment was to become a better person. And so sometimes I think we think as adults, especially older adults, that really is not important anymore because we're old. We're settled. We've got life figured out or whatever it is. But if that's the case and you hold true to that, well, then who are your children and grandchildren going to look to as role models for what it looks like to deal with stress or to deal with things that are emotional, big feelings, and instead we kind of look at them and we go, come on, power through it, level up, man up, don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Big girls don't cry. you're okay, and we discount their felt or perceived experiences, and that really doesn't bode well for many people, especially in those younger formative years, who are still trying to find their identity, which is very much associated with their feelings, which are very much their stress response. In scientific terms, you'd call it their amygdala, their hippocampus, right? It's where big emotions live, where the stress or survival response lives. And we're up here as adults thinking and believing that our prefrontal cortex is intact enough that we can put time and distance between our stress response and our thoughtful response to life situations. And so we've done a lot of research, a lot of talk. We've processed a lot. If you're going to connect with your grandkids, those are some of the issues that become meaningful, and you have to model it. You have to show it. So I'm kind of rambling there, but that's kind of
that's
essence.
okay. No, I can see that. And why do you think that adults have such a tough time trying to build that connection? Why do you think sometimes we can get stuck when it comes to building that connection with young people?
Well, we all live in our own world. We live in our own head, and it's really hard to be vulnerable. When you talk about the needs that we have as humans, as kids have, I obviously I can speak from a male perspective better than a female perspective, and we don't want to, we guys, we don't want to be weak. If there's anything that we don't want to be, is to be perceived as weak or not strong. And so we put on this cover, this pose, this front or whatever it is, and it's like we're going to appear to the world like we have everything put together. The other part of that, again, goes back to the culture of, you say, why it's so hard to connect. Well, because we forgot maybe what it was like to be a kid. We forgot what it was like to not understand who our am is, our I am, what our identity is. We forgot what it was like maybe to be bullied on the playground, or to be not accepted, or to think that we weren't pretty, or that the guys want to know that they have what it takes, right? And the girls want to know that they're attractive, or would be sought after, or rescued, or that they're wanted. And we all have these basic human needs to want to attach and belong and be part of a tribe, be part of a family. And yet we've got these insecurities going into life's game. And we forget about that, and because we've kind of figured it all out. We've already adapted or maladapted sufficiently that we can get along and function. But these kids are still figuring that out. And what they want to know is that we would accept them just the way they are, which means just the way their feelings are. Their feelings are their identity in large measure. And how they feel, or how they respond when stress is there, they have big feelings, or they can't quite cope, or they're not themselves regulated well. We again, we discount that, and we don't accept them in their big feelings. We just say, get over it, grow up, be big, be strong, you can do this, And instead of saying, let's just take a moment and I'll hold your hand while you work through the feeling, because the feeling is not the problem. You are not the problem. You're having a feeling is not a problem. And yet we just want to move forward. And doing that sends a message that I don't accept you with your feelings. The feelings aren't okay. So that's all kind of wrapped into that. And I think when we look at old people, and say, maybe we've got it all figured out, but you know what? There's a 7-year-old boy inside of every grandpa, and there's a 7-year-old girl inside of every grandmother. And if we just stop for a minute and understand that empathy, true empathy, is understanding that our real 7-year-old grandchildren are just like we were when we were that age. And they have those same insecurities and misgivings and whatever, that we had. And we ought to pause once in a while and just empathize with them and say, yeah, that was tough when we were there too. I get it.
So I've got a follow up around this part because we've got two. To me, I think we have two different things going on. There's the feeling in the moment, and then there's the feeling that's lasting a little longer. And what I mean by that is the feeling that I'm not a good student, I'm not a good athlete. That that's carrying on multiple days versus I'm upset because of this incident. And so how do you how do we connect, and then how do we also help recognize the feeling in the moment, but then also help with guiding somebody through where they may be making decisions and choices, and this is probably older children, young adults, where we can see as loving grandparents that they may be on the verge of making a mistake. And of course, we don't want anybody to touch the hot stove, but sometimes touching that hot stove is how you learn. But I'm also concerned about sometimes young adults making decisions that have longer consequences than the end of the week, let's say.
Well, I'm reminded. Your question reminds me of a comment that Jordan Peterson is often says, and it's not original with him. He's basically saying what other people said as well, and that is, don't steal their future. And when we decide that we're going to step in and remove the consequence, or we're going to disable the opportunities for learning, in quote marks, right? We're in effect stealing their future. Meaning, how are they going to learn? How are they going to grow? There needs to be challenge. There needs to be some failure. You got to touch the hot stove once in a while. I'm sure gonna, if my 6-year-old or 6-month old wanders into a busy street, well, I'm not going to stand on the sidelines and allow that to happen, right? There are some lines that we just don't cross. Um, but having said that, it's okay for them to, burn their skin, in an example like that, or even, to fall off a swing set and break their arm. I mean, I'm saying that that's what I would want, but my point is, we don't want to steal their future. Um, to answer the question that you started with, there is the difference between there, I think, is about identity. It's like if I have a big feeling in the moment, that doesn't necessarily set my identity. If I start going where I am a failure, I am no good, I am wrong all the time, or people don't like me, or if those are where I'm going with my identity, I think we, as the older adults in the room, as the grandparents, can see that, and without gaslighting, without manipulating, without shaming, we can help reinforce positive I am messages. I am strong. I am capable. I am learning. Just because I make a mistake doesn't mean that I am stupid. But we grow up thus, and we all relate to that because we lived the same thing. And some of this is they don't have an adult brain yet. That doesn't happen until they're 20 to 25 to 28. So we are co-regulating with them because they are unable to regulate 100% on their own. In fact, I think some grandparents can't regulate 100% on their own, and we have to get together and co-regulate each other, right, as we learn these principles ourselves. But so I think there's a difference between the identity focus of what I am or how I see myself, and the idea that feelings are okay. You know, feelings are just a natural part of having a natural body that has a stress response system that can feel stress or threat and the need to survive once in a while. But those are not my identity. And too often in our society, our culture, we mix those up and think that the fact that I have a big feeling means that I am not okay. No, it just means you have a big feeling, as part of life.
And how are you and Roland are pretty much in sync? So I feel very comfortable asking you this, but how do you feel about how grandparents can help children understand in young adults understand that they have those feelings, but then they also need to be able to push through those feelings.
Well, I think you acknowledge that you accept them just as they are. If they're and again, all this is kind of age dependent. A
Mm-hmm.
6-year old versus a 16-year-old is going to have a very different response to stuff going on in their life, right?
Right.
So in an age appropriate way, we can somehow send the message to them that your feelings are not a problem to me. I accept you just the way you are. And I think sometimes in the back of our brain, we have preconceived boundaries of what we're willing to tolerate or accept, thinking that if we accept them, then that means that we agree with whatever bad choices they might potentially make or are making. And this is kind of the conundrum of agency. It's like, how do you allow them to have the agency or the freedom to touch the hot stove once in a while, to learn these lessons? But what we want to do is to shut down the feeling. We want to say, it's okay, you shouldn't have that feeling, or that feeling is not okay. But at the same time, be able to model what it looks like to have bad stuff happen. It's like the old thing of, why does bad things happen to good people? Well, that's the way life was designed. If it wasn't designed that way, how would we ever grow without making mistakes, right? And so I accept you with your mistakes. I accept you with your feelings, your big feelings. It's okay. I will be here for you as we work through or sit through or patiently deal with whatever the turmoil is that you feel is in your life, but that doesn't define you. And again, the idea of a parent or grandparent showing up and saying, yeah, notwithstanding all of the above, I'm here for you 100% with my love. I may not totally agree with every decision you make, but my love is just not, it's not negotiable. We don't, because what happens is that when I don't accept your feelings, I'm telling you that my love is conditional. We start this conditioned approval. This I will love you, I will be with you, but only if. And somehow we have to understand that, no, as a parent or grandparent, we accept them just the way they are in all of their messiness. They'll grow up and they'll figure this out, and eventually they'll make different decisions. Maybe some good, maybe not some not so good, and maybe like us, they won't learn the lessons till they're 70. It's okay, you know.
Sure. And could you share a story perhaps that you guys have seen working with other people about how somebody's been able, a grandfather, grandmother, aunt, uncle, who's been able to kind of start to embrace this and be able to work with grandchildren and or young adults about working through their feelings and accepting those feelings?
I don't know if I have one that's right on the top of my tongue. I have worked with quite a number of grandparents in just talking about this in settings where we get into kind of some of this philosophy, but it's more from the premise of, there's 10,001 things you can do, techniques, tactics, strategies, um, verbal skills, language skills, and so forth, about how you can interact with your children. But it all has to start with the concept of, if you want them to change, which we all want them to become better, right? You have to change first. And that takes time. That doesn't happen, but it has to come from the beginning place of awareness, being able to name the issue. Think of the concept of neuroplasticity. Back to this primitive brain and the adult prefrontal cortex brain, right? That what is it that's developing? It's all neuroplasticity. And the reason why I can have a certain skill set, or to be really good at a sport or whatever it is, something that's repetitious, right, and requires a high level of skill, is because I do it over and over and over again. I've laid down brain pathways, neurological pathways in my brain that give me the ability, the capacity to be able to perform those things, whatever those things are. And I think being a grandparent is the same way, but also being a kid is the same way. And it takes time for that to develop. And while they're figuring that out, while they're laying down new brain cells, we over here need to be doing the same thing. And so modeling that, the stories you're asking for are all around us. And grandparents who decide that they're not going to manipulate, they're not going to grandstand, they're not going to gaslight or shame or do anything like that. They're just going to be pure with themselves, and they're going to say, "Man, I mean, how many grandparents have you witnessed that who would apologize? Who would model what it looks like to say they're sorry, or that this is what I've learned in my own experience in life. Let me share it with you." Not as a manipulative thing, but as a demonstrative way to show what it looks like that old people can lay down new brain cells and change too. We can do neuroplasticity improvement day to day and become better. But it all goes with that mindset of, if we've got it, we think we've got it figured out. That's kind of a pose. We're blocking ourselves from our own transformation if we're not willing to learn and be engaged in that process and to be open. Beyond that, there's just a lot of technique. It's like, well, how do you talk different? How do you talk better? I remember I was sitting down with my 16-year-old, and we were in a group. There was some other people there, and the attention came to me. It's like, yeah, this is my grandpa. And she looked at this person and said, "Do you know what makes him a great grandpa?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be cool to hear what makes me a cool grandpa." And she brought up something that I did 2 years ago, and it was that I sent her a handwritten thank you letter in the mail. And she still remembers that. That had an impact on her, because she said, nobody does that. Like, who sends letters? That was so special. It was just something that was a technique or a strategy that I use with my grandkids. And I actually keep track of, like, when I sent something to who, so I don't, I've got 21 grandkids. I want it to be even and fair, right? Because they talk, right?
Right.
And so it's just a strategy, right? But she still remembers that. And we could turn the page and talk about all kinds of ways to use your text message and get into their space or fish in their pond, as we say, or whatever. But anyway, those are my stories.
Yeah. No, I love it. What has been some of the feedback that you and Roland have been getting about Grand Connect and about Hearts of the Father? Because this is a little bit of a mind shift. In I've got to be careful saying those words. In that, instead of like, hey, here's just all the fun stuff we're going to be doing, it's actually being intentional about listening to what the emotions are, where the grandkids are at, and accepting that.
Yeah, that's the feedback that we're getting is, and you can kind of see it when I'm talking with grandparents about these issues. You'll see that their blink rate slows down, and their head kind of goes to the side, and you can tell when they are now listening to your stories, but they're really listening to their own stories. They're looking at, how are they involved? Because these are new thoughts and new ideas. I've yet really to speak, seriously or in depth with anyone where that experience doesn't happen, to where they start to contemplate, well, what would it look like for me to change fundamentally how I approach this? And I start listening, and I start asking different questions, and I start following up and reflecting. And we have a thing in the book, Grand Connect, where we talk about reflective listening, which is like putting a mirror up in front of somebody else, and they're actually looking at themselves in the mirror through my questions that I'm asking them. But the problem is that if I fog the mirror and put my fog on the mirror, they can't see themselves or that reflection very well. So the point is, I have to get my fog off of the mirror so that they can see the reflective conversation. And this is about listening them into being. If I can listen to them in a manner that affirms them and tells them that they're valued. Just like my phone is not in front of me. I don't have the newspaper in front of me. I'm not distracted. They have my attention, and I accept them just the way they are with all their messiness. When they know that and they feel that, then you have connection. And you have to do that 10,000 times. It's not a one and done thing. You just keep doing it. But as you keep doing that, then they know that you're in their corner. They know that you'll fight for them and you'll battle for their heart, and that you will just be there with them and for them. And that requires a fundamental change in a grandparent's mindset as to what their role is, in terms of that. It's not just about doing the fun stuff all the time. That's part of it, obviously. You're the king of that, representing that idea. But this is a new, and to me, this is kind of a new thing, at least for us as well, is where does this take us in terms of how do you really get deeper? What is that influence going to look like if you died tomorrow? What would you have left behind that they will always remember from you? Not just the fishing, but the fact that you fished with them in their pond.
Oh, I love it. And do you feel that this is kind of a point in time where you can see this kind of, lack of a better word, almost a revolution in grandparents and especially grandfathers looking for that emotional connection versus just the family connection that we have because of birth?
Exactly. I mean, I have a daughter who is a paralegal in an elementary school, not paralegal, a para educator in an elementary school. And so we talk a lot about what her role is in her work assignment at the school with regards to SEL, social emotional learning. It's a big deal in elementary school, at least here in our area. I'm sure it is everywhere else. And why is that? Well, it's because these kids, these hundreds and thousands of kids, come into elementary school not having that foundation laid for them in their homes about what it means to be emotionally regulated. They don't know what that means. So this the whole SEL, emotional language, social emotional learning, is about that. And so my point in that is that, to me, this is the foundation stone for grandparent grandchild relationships, is the ability to be emotionally regulated. That is what our society just doesn't do well at. We spend our time in screens. We don't go out and learn to develop our brains. We don't learn to communicate. We don't learn to accept other people just the way they are, which would then free them to make different choices. If you want people to change, take the shame out of the equation. Let's not shame them. But wait a minute, we would say they're going to do this, that, and the other. And it's like, they might. They actually might be that way. Again, age appropriate boundaries, right?
Sure.
They might do that, but if I don't shame them, they'll be more likely to choose change than to feel like we're coercing it on it. I can get them to do what I want them to do if I shame them. And it's quick, it's fast. But if I back up and I say, let's accept you the way you are, what I'm doing is I'm teaching them, modeling for them what emotional regulation looks like in a human being. And that's developing the brain cells, the pathways, the prefrontal cortex, where the language, the executive function, and the ability to think about thoughts, that's where that lives. It's not the reflexive, reactionary things that happen. And it's placing time and distance between stimulus and response, making it bigger and bigger. And again, they can't do this when they're young. It's a gradual thing. And so I have to show up as a regulated person so that I can co-regulate them while they learn this through the experiences of life, and be patient with them while they do.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And yeah, I think we're starting to see grandfathers becoming more engaged on that emotional level than probably we have in past generations. And so I think this is going to lead to some good stuff.
Yeah, you just have to take interest in where their heart is at the moment. And it's okay, wherever it's at, they're growing. I am being patient with them, for them, while they're growing a brain.
Yep. Lee, I know we're bumping up against our time here. Is there anything else about Heart of the Fathers or Grand Connect that you would like to talk about that I maybe haven't asked you?
It would just be maybe a plea to people who are watching this, to um, get educated about this. If these are new thoughts to you, there is there's such a plethora of resources out there today. From videos to books. There's some really prominent writers on this. So you can go to grandconnect.com. There's a resources section in there. I think I've got maybe a dozen plus books that I've just devoured in the last several months that speak to some of these topics. So become educated and just open. I think the biggest problem that we have is our own pride. We put this pose up that we're okay. There's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing to see here. And if we just kind of swallow that a little bit, maybe a lot, and we just admit that we don't know everything, and it's okay to be vulnerable. How are our adult children? You think of all the rifts and the estrangements and everything that's going on, and the dynamics between older grandparents and their adult children. Even it's like you're not going to have access to your grandchildren if you've got a problem with your adult children. It doesn't matter whose fault it is or which direction the arrows point. You're going to lose access to having any influence with your grandchildren if that relationship isn't good. So what's wrong with just showing up as a grandparent and just saying, you know what, I screwed up, I messed up, I'm vulnerable. You're kind of putting yourself at other people's mercy, but if you don't do that, you're lost anyway, right? So I would say to the grandfathers is like, it's a natural thing to surround yourself with a cocoon, with a veneer, with a pose, with a defense, with a justification, whatever you want to call it. It's pride, it doesn't matter how else you want to slice or dice it. And we just say, can we be secure enough with ourselves that we can fall on our sword, that we can just say, you know what, we messed up. It doesn't matter who's right, who's wrong. This is not the direction we want things to go. And we want to model that, because a quick way for a problem to develop eventually between our adult children and our grandchildren is for the grandchildren to have seen what happened between us and our adult children. And now when they grow up, they go, that's the solution. I just cut my parents off, or I have these issues with my parents because they couldn't figure it out. That's what I'm supposed to do. And somewhere somebody has to step in and stop this. We have to save the future by restoring these relationships. And it happens best, I think, when we can drop our pose, we can become vulnerable, we can say, I can learn, it's okay, I don't have to be the know-it-all. What if you went to your adult children and your grandchildren and said, teach me something I don't know, talk to me until I understand, right? And we just dropped all that defensiveness about it. I think if we did that, we would see a remarkable change in the shifts and the dynamics of how our families worked better together, because somebody's got to step in and do that. Otherwise, our grandkids aren't going to grow up knowing even what it looks like to say they're sorry, or to change, or to aspire, or to have a new identity. So I'm just saying, grandpas, just step up. It's okay. Say you're sorry. If it doesn't even matter, it doesn't matter. Just do it.
Oh, I love it. And Lee, where's the best place people can get in contact with you, or Heart of the Fathers, or Grand Connect?
Well, there's a couple of websites there. Heartofthefathers.com is one place. Heartofthefathers.com. Grandconnect.com is also, and there's connections there. My email, I just put it out there, is my name, LeeOstler @gmail. Anybody's welcome to contact me, and we'll share more. We'll be starting a podcast here shortly that we will title Winning the Battle for Heart and Connection. And so we'll be developing these themes and bringing in many experts who can speak better than I can. I'm not a professional psychologist, or I don't do psychotherapy, but I am a professional grandpa, and I make professional level mistakes. So we learn from those and move forward. So I'm happy to share our experiences on those forums.
That's awesome. And I'm assuming the pay for professional grandfathers are lots of hugs and lots of hand holding with little ones.
Even a lot of tears. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some very humbling, precious moments. When I just had an experience the other day when I had some older grandkids, and we were in a men's retreat with them. And that was a choice experience. Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. But and where I kind of expressed some of my own vulnerabilities, and I had my grandkids coming up and giving me long, delicious hugs. They were seeing a grandpa be vulnerable, and it was really a very rewarding experience.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
that stuff just starts to happen.
That's fantastic. And Lee, thank you so much for coming on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really have enjoyed this conversation and learning more about Heart of the Fathers.
Well, you do a great job here. We love following your lead as being the coolest grandpa.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye bye, everybody.
I really appreciated Lee coming on to the podcast and sharing his wisdom about how grandfathers can really connect, can meet our grandchildren where they are, especially when it comes to the deep feelings that they have over things that maybe we just have the initial impression of like, oh, brush it off. But that's coming from us having an experience of 50 years, maybe 60, 70, 80, whatever it is, having that long of an experience. We know that sometimes the ups and downs in life, those things we can just kind of work through. But our grandchildren, this is oftentimes the first time they're experiencing a setback, first time they're experiencing heartbreak, first time they're starting to question their identity and where they fit in, not only with the family, but in the world in general. And so these feelings that they have are very intense. And I appreciated Lee sharing his experience as well as his wisdom about how we can meet and really be there for our grandchildren as they're navigating through life's ups and downs. I want to remind you again, please go to readgrand.com. Check out this spring issue of Grand Magazine. Take a look at what I've written, review that article, and then let me know what you think Generation X grandparents and grandfathers in particular, where we are going to make our biggest impact. I've got some ideas on where I think we're going, but I'd love to hear you. And I know the folks at Grand Magazine would also love to hear your comments and your thoughts about where grandparenting is heading in the coming generations that are moving into that space of grandparents. Not only Generation X, but heck, I think we're starting to get some millennials that are starting to trickle into the grandparenting experience as well. So we would all love to hear your comments, and we'd love to get your feedback on where you think grandparenting is heading. So I really appreciate you listening to this podcast. Be sure to check out Heart of the Fathers, and I've got links to all the things that Lee and I talked about into the show notes as well. So check out these great resources and remember to stay cool.